The situation is to be addressed. What it really comes down to is stakeholders. Those individuals, groups, or organizations who, through their responsibilities, have in fact created the set of relationships responsible for producing the situation. And while stakeholders may directly affect the situation or be affected by the situation, and they may actually affect each other, there's also a class of stakeholders who do not directly influence the situation, though are influenced by it. And when undertaking to understand all of the relationships, they should be taken into account also, because if you end up changing the nature of the influence the situation has on them, they could in fact actually become influencing stakeholders. So it's important to ferret out and understand what it is that the stakeholders believe and what it is that motivates them, so that you have a sense of how it is that they have decided that the current situation, that the set of relationships that's responsible for that situation is sensible from their perspective. And you probably recall that this picture was visible in one of the other segments, that typically the set of relationships that are responsible for creating the situation have evolved over time based upon a set of stakeholders who are typically not on the same wavelength. And be advised that figuring out the beliefs and motivations of stakeholders is more an art than a science. There are a couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is a quote that Gregory House seemed to be very fond of, which was, "Everybody lies." If you ask stakeholders about their beliefs and motivations, the tendency is for them not to tell you the truth, but to tell you what they believe that you will find acceptable, so you will stop asking the question. The second thought is, I think it's an old Russian proverb, which is trust but verify, so that when you begin to understand what the beliefs and motivations are, you need to find some way to verify that, and we'll talk about ways to go about doing that in another segment. So once you're aware of who the stakeholders are, their beliefs and motivations, part of what is appropriate to understand is, within the context of the situation, there are multiple interacting components, and it's the relationship between those components that is responsible for the situation being the way it is. There are a number of elements which are outside the context of the situation, which are considered to be part of the environment. The situation has an influence on things in the environment, and the environment has influence on things that are part of the situation. You need to know the difference between them, because they're all relevant, and part of understanding the stakeholders is figuring out which stakeholders are responsible for which of the elements, and therefore have an influence on the relationships that are causing the situation to be the way it is. You probably recall this diagram from one of the previous segments, where I talked about we have a an area of influence which is typically far smaller than our area of concern. The situation that we really want to deal with is typically greater than our area of influence, though the comment was that if we focus on our area of concern, our area of influence tends to shrink. If we focus on our area of influence, it tends to expand. So if you want to address a situation which is more expansive than your area of influence, what is appropriate is to identify collaborators who are responsible for or have influence over elements, relationships that are part of the area of concern, which is broader than your area of influence. And the best of all worlds, if those collaborators are, in fact, the stakeholders that were identified as being responsible for those pieces. So that, I mean, there's a difference between stakeholders being responsible for and individuals who are in a position to have influence over elements of the relationships. And we'll talk about that in a bit more depth in another segment. So hope you found this interesting, informative, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.